Hello, all my film music classmates out there. My name is Michael Genslinger, and I'm a graduate student at UNF. I'm currently working on my master's in music education, and I am actually also a former graduate student at UNF. A couple of years ago, I graduated with my master's in trumpet performance. So I appreciate Dr. Provost offering this class to graduate students because I think it's an interesting topic, and it's one that I feel like I've learned a lot of over the course of the semester. And I appreciate all of you, and I've learned from all of you guys throughout the course of the semester in our discussions and all that kind of stuff. So I've enjoyed the class, and hopefully you enjoy this presentation on the history of orchestral film music. Now, the reason why I chose this topic is because I like orchestral music, and I like orchestral music soundtracks in particular, because I think my opinion is that it's the new opera, it's the new art style, and we may not view that right now, but I think that as we progress throughout the 21st century, we will eventually understand that film music is essential, especially in our current culture, the way that operatic composing became really, really important in the 19th century as well. So let's take a look at how orchestral film music has fit into the 5 different genres that we've studied this semester. The 5 different genres that we've taken a look at, of course, have been silent film period, the early talking picture period, the Hollywood period, documentaries, and the past 40 years. And we're going to take a look at how orchestral music has fit into each one of these genres or categories. First, taking a look at the silent film period. The first film created was in France in 1895, but the technology didn't exist to integrate sound and picture on a reel. So musicians were originally positioned near the screen inside the theater, and musicians largely improvised or used books to figure out what to play during the course of the film. The first orchestral score was The Birth of a Nation in 1915 by Joseph Carl Breil, and he used pre-existing classical and folk music and the leitmotif technique. Now, you probably remember this was one of our first assignments at the beginning of the semester, where we had to sit down and watch The Birth of the Nation, or at least some of us chose The Birth of a Nation, and that is one thing that I chose because of the orchestral score and how kind of groundbreaking it was, set aside from the obvious, racial undertones and the racism of the film. The music was really interesting to listen to, how he used it, especially during the silent film period. Moving on to the early talking picture period. This period, which happened right around the mid-1920s, saw a lot of large leaps in terms of the technology that was used. The new Vitaphone technology enabled picture with sound on a reel, and the first film music that was used that incorporated a score was Don Juan in 1926. And the first I apologize. The first film that has spoken dialogue that we saw was The Jazz Singer, and of course that was part of our that was part of our assignments as well. This quickly became the new standard in the theaters, and the theater started to install speakers. So just in a few years, all of the theater musicians were basically fired and replaced by speakers, so that everyone would basically have the same viewing experience. Even though jazz was popular, symphonic jazz was an important medium for film at this time as well. One important thing that I want to kind of focus on during this period is that theater musicians lost their playing jobs, but many went to teach band in public schools. During this time, band actually became incredibly popular, and many people who were playing in the theaters used the expansion of instrumental music in the public schools to get work when they got fired. And I know that's not exactly part of what was taught, but in my music ed class, that's something that we actually talked about with the expansion of instrumental music. Large budgeted films employed famous orchestras to record scores. For example, the New York Philharmonic was used to record Don Juan in 1926. The Hollywood period, early on in the movie theater, was the primary source of entertainment, even during the Great Depression. People still had whatever disposable income they might have had. They used it on the theater because that was how they were entertained back then. Film music composition became more industrialized because there were so many films being made. A lot of music had to be composed. So there were multiple composers per movie, and there was almost like an assembly line approach to creating orchestral scores. And so people were able to cut and paste specific themes and things like that. If something was fast, it would just be a fast little thing, or if something was sad, you had somebody specifically that was there composing sad music, or if somebody was something happy was happening, then a specific happy composer would be there to plug that in. And this was because it was really important to have quantity over quality of music, because there were so many films being made during this time. Some 20th century classical composers looked down on film composers during this time because they believed that the concert hall was better than the film theater. Some composers thought that using leitmotif and themes was useless because the public wasn't smart enough to understand what was going on. However, Max Steiner opposed this view, and he actually became very successful. And Max Steiner really was a really large influence on the modern composer John Williams, which we'll talk about here in a second. The post-World War trend to move out of the city and into suburbs actually was a really big hit to the movie theater industry, mainly because of all of the theaters that were in the city. Not many people living in the city, so therefore all of those theaters shut down. Also due to this was the invention of the television, which also caused many theaters to close down, and television took over as the primary source of entertainment. And this eventually led to a restructuring of the film industry, and ultimately led to the film industry, quote, recession. Even though there wasn't necessarily an economic recession, the film industry experienced this recession because of the changing in technologies and the way people consumed film and their primary source of entertainment. On to documentaries. So the early producers of documentaries believed in absolute realism. This means that whenever they shot a documentary, that you should not hear or experience anything that wasn't exactly in the scene that they are documenting. This meant that music had no place in documentaries, and if there was music, then it should be taken exactly from the environment that was being documented. So if you were documenting a bar, or a scene from a nightclub or something like that, you would only have the music that was in that nightclub be in that documentary. This actually changed over time. Now orchestral music is used very similarly compared to fiction films. It helps provide a narrative, it helps provide a sense of realism, it plays to the audience's emotions, and therefore acts as a really good tool of persuasion. The past 40 years have marked a really huge change in the way people consume film and the way that films have been marketed. In the mid-1970s, it marked the turnaround in the Hollywood recession. The new formula for selling soundtrack albums and films basically resulted in an oversaturation of the market and really targeted the youth as the audience that they were really trying to get after. John Williams proved that orchestral scores could sell soundtrack albums, as related to Jaws in 1975, and of course, we all know Star Wars in 1977. And if you know me, I'm a really huge Star Wars fan. John Williams was influenced by classical romantic composers of the 19th century, such as Wagner and Tchaikovsky. If you listen closely to a lot of John Williams film scores, you can hear a lot of Wagner and Tchaikovsky in there, not exactly copying them, but more or less quoting some of the techniques that they use in terms of orchestration and how they used woodwinds and brass instruments. He was also really influenced by Max Steiner and used the leitmotif a lot in his film scores. This made the orchestral film score a popular and effective medium throughout the film industry, and basically made it okay to have just orchestral music as part of the soundtrack. Another popular trend has been to have orchestral mixed with popular music soundtracks, such as the most recent ones that we know of is Guardians of the Galaxy. And the digital age has brought upon many crossover industries, such as the selling of toys, video games, apparel, social media, marketing. The franchises of Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Marvel all have fantastic orchestral music, but also have become so mainstream that the orchestral music has become mainstream. I teach elementary music full-time, and I can play Hedwig's theme on the piano, and the students know exactly what that's from. I can play the Imperial March theme on a keyboard instrument, and those students know exactly what comes to their mind. Even if they haven't seen Star Wars, the music is almost more popular than the movie it is itself, which is something that is pretty unprecedented up until the past 40 years or so. In conclusion, orchestral music and musicians have been an intricate part of the film industry since the beginning. Because of how composers can help provide narrative with orchestral music, it is likely here to stay. And nowadays, consumers expect memorable music to be a part of the film experience. I want to thank you guys for watching this presentation on orchestral music, and I hope that you have a great holiday season. And I look forward to meeting you guys in the future and working with everybody, and good luck in all of your studies.